Yesterday I was perusing the Christian websites and news and came across a headline that captured my attention. And the headline was something along the lines of, "Your church may be growing due to this unbiblical trend." I said, whoa, your church may be growing due to this unbiblical trend. So I thought through some things, and kind of the things we've been talking about would be some things that we would want to do. So I was thinking, well, maybe this person's going to talk about the loss of sound doctrine, or refusing to preach the gospel, or forsaking this. Well, that wouldn't be growing; that'd be reducing. But I figured it was about doctrine or music. That's a big thing now, about styles of music and so forth. So I opened it up and I looked at the article, and guess what the author said is the reason that some churches are growing on the foundation of this unbiblical practice. Preachers not wearing suits. I wish I were kidding. Preachers not wearing suits was the unbiblical practice, and yet churches are growing because with preachers who wear blue jeans and their shirt tails out and stuff like that, and how disrespectful to God that is, and so forth. Well, I'm not worried about attire. I'm more concerned about the real things. And those are the things we've been talking about so far this year. Remember I said 3 recommendations for this year, for 2020, because we live in a time when the cultural tide is going against biblical Christianity. Now, you can call that alarmism or whatever you want to do. I don't care. It's still true. The biblical tide is going against biblical Christianity, to the point that in some instances Christians can be persecuted today for holding to a biblical stand. So with that environment has come a lot of pressure and for a lot of Christians, and unfortunately some are folding and compromising based on the promise, if you'll go along with us, we'll stop bothering you. And so they have compromised the truth and they've done the age-old thing of, well, does the Bible really say that? You know, the first person who pulled that question was Satan. Did God really say? Yeah. And so we still have it going today. Did God really say that? Does the Bible really say that? And so I've told you before, the Bible is not complicated on most, or confusing on most issues. It's just inconvenient. And that's true. This is true today as it's ever been. But what I want to do is encourage us, because I'm not speaking to everyone unless they watch his YouTube video or Facebook video. I'm just speaking to us. And so what I want to encourage us with over the past 3 weeks is 3 key things that I think that we need to hold on to if we're going to remain faithful to God as the culture turns more and more against our worldview. Does that make sense? So if you remember week 1, we talked about what? Diana just mentioned.
Yeah, staying intimately connected with God.
Right, that's right. Remain or be intimately connected with God. And if you remember, that comes from John 15 when Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches." Okay? So the branches depend on the vine for life, for sustenance, and for the energy to produce the fruit. The only way a branch will produce fruit is if it stays connected to the vine. So Jesus kept saying, if you read the passage over and over, abide in me, depending on the translation, some say abide in me, others say remain in me. And the point I wanted to make on that is, it's a choice. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you are going to stay connected to Christ. Some people will disconnect themselves from Christ. And I'm not saying that they lose salvation or whatever, but they lose fellowship. They break fellowship. And Jesus said, if you don't stay connected with me, what's going to happen? You will not be able to produce fruit. Now, does that mean we can do nothing? Then the word in the passage, he says, without me, you can do nothing. But actually, what he's talking about there is you can produce no good fruit. We can do something without Christ. Make a mess. Now, we can make a mess. If we get sideways with God for whatever the reason, it won't be long, and we will have made a mess. And we can produce fruit. It won't be the good fruit. We can produce religious fruit. Religious fruit is bitter. Nobody wants to eat it. It's bad. But we can produce it. If we're disconnected from Christ, we can still be very religious. But if we're going to produce the good fruit, and if you remember we said the fruit here he's talking about is the internal fruit of the Spirit that gives evidence to the fact that we are connected to Him. See, we can't fake that. Now, you might be able to work it up for a little bit to fake it, but before long, you're going to lose that ability because you cannot sustain it through the flesh. If you could, then we wouldn't have to stay connected with Christ. But since we do, then there's no way we can sustain that for very long in the flesh. So remain intimately connected with Christ. Number 2, do you remember the recommendation from last week? Don't compromise the truth. Like I said, the Bible's not confusing, just inconvenient. So do not compromise the truth. And we began with 2 Timothy 3. Now I'll just remind you of that. Verse 1, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Now, who's he talking about there? I'm glad I don't live in that time. Aren't you glad we don't live in that time? Yeah, right. Who's he talking about there? He's not talking about lost folks. Lost folks are already like that. He's talking about saved folks are going to become like that. That's what makes this stand out for Paul, is that there's going to come a time, and it happened in his life, and it's always been true. It's just things get progressively worse. And every generation assumes it can't get any worse than what it is in their generation. And for the last 100 years or so, that's why every generation said Jesus has got to come back any day now, because we can't imagine it getting any worse than it is right now. And what happens? It gets worse. So, he's talking about this condition or this situation where the environment is such that Christians begin to demonstrate all these behaviors. And remember what he said about it. He said they're going to be lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Well, a lost person doesn't love God anyway. So he's talking about Christians who become lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. How might you see that today? Well, if everything isn't set up just right in some churches, folks won't come back. You know, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and she had visited a very large, popular church in another state. And I said, well, how'd you like it? She said, well, it was quite the presentation. I said, it was. She said, they had strobe lights going. They had the rock bands up there getting with it. They put on a light show. They had smoke coming out on the stage. And she said, it was quite a presentation. I said, would you want to go back? No. But now there are many people who do. They go every week because they expect it to be quite a presentation. And if you take that away from them, they're going to say, what happened? Something's wrong here. I don't know about you, but I've been around folks before that if during the worship service they don't get some type of goosebumps, my hair stood up, I wanted to cry, or some kind of physical something during the worship service, the first question out of their mouth is, I wonder what's wrong with the music leader or the music team. Must be sin in the camp. Because I didn't have any goosebumps today. Gonna have to get some folks repenting up there on the praise team, looks like. Or if the preacher wasn't quite as funny today as he normally is, well, it sounds like he's needing to go get before the Lord, work on some material. Because this wasn't quite as humorous as he normally is.
The sound of people might be doing their own kingdom up there.
Yeah, if you've never seen that video, that's a good one. I hope I never do that. We're talking about the video of the preacher that unloads on the congregation during his church, and it starts. What was it? The guy was asleep, wasn't it?
I think the sound booth people.
And he got to the sound booth, and
They were establishing their own kingdom.
yeah, the sound booth guy was building his own kingdom in the sound booth with the teenagers. So we're not doing that here, but anyway, I forget. It's something like angry preacher unloads on congregation or something. If you want to see it on YouTube, I showed it here one Wednesday night. So, but I'm not talking about that. I wonder if he's still there.
That's a good one.
That would be my question, if he's still there. I bet the sound booth guy's not.
One of the others don't.
Yeah. But that's this idea of if it doesn't make me feel good, if it doesn't give me some kind of a positive, warm, fuzzy experience, then God must not be around. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time when you're walking with God, you're not going to have warm, fuzzy experiences. That's just the way it is. That's called life. So, lovers of God, but and having a form of godliness, but denying its power. So they look the part, but they don't really have the substance of the part. Okay? And then notice the last thing he says to Timothy. He doesn't tell Timothy, now go out and try to win them back to the Lord. He doesn't tell Timothy, go out and try to convict them of what they're doing and try to straighten them out. No, he says, have nothing to do with such people. So again, we're not talking about lost folks. If they were lost folks, Paul would say, go preach to them. But these are folks who know better. They've just chosen to turn away from sound doctrine. So when people turn away from sound doctrine, what do they turn to? Christian myths. A Christian myth, and it's usually a Christian myth that's been wrapped up in Bible verses. So it sounds right. Might be partially right. You know, it's kind of like, I know some TV preachers get a bad rap because they like to present the partial truth as the whole of truth. And if you present partial truth as the whole of truth, what are you really presenting? A lie. And so if we, every Sunday, if I got up here and said, you know, God just wants to bless you, He just wants to pack your pockets full of money. He wants all that sickness out of your family. He wants all of y'all getting along and loving each other. He's going to do all of this if you'll just believe, 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 believe. Well, how much have I got to believe? More. Well, how much is more? More. Is it working yet? No. Okay, believe more. And I'm not surprised when young converts get kind of pulled into that because it sounds so good. It sounds so positive. But after a while, you would think they would say, wait a minute, this doesn't work. And some end up in it for years. I read a thing last night, a blog a guy had done, where he had been involved in a lot of that kind of stuff when he was a young believer. And he told of all the groups he was part of and revivals he went to and all the things he had done, and he'd been believing and confessing and doing all the things he was told to do, and none of it ever worked. Now you say, does that mean God doesn't answer prayer? No. We're supposed to pray in faith. God answers prayer. But He doesn't always give us what we want. And don't make me talk about my motorcycle again. Because I saw one the other day on Facebook for sale and almost jumped when I saw it. Of course, I would squish it now, but back in the day, if I could have just had that Yamaha 80, I would have been something else. And I prayed hard for it, but it never came. And that's what this guy was saying. He said, he spent years in that, and he was believing, confessing, and everything else for certain things to happen, and none of them happened. And you know what he did? He got discouraged and chunked it off. God does want to bless us. God does want to make life better for us, but we've got to understand His definition of better versus ours. It's kind of like the word fair. You know, kids used to always say, well, that's not fair. And I would always tell them, the only fair in life is the one that comes to town in November. They didn't like that, but anyway, it was still true. But fair, what does fair mean? Well, in my dictionary, fair means I always win and get what I want. That's fair. Is that the same definition in your dictionary? If life's fair, then I get what I want. And that's fair. If I don't get what I want, life's not fair. Well, we got to define what is good. Sometimes we'll read like Romans 8:28 and say, well, good. And He said He's promised to work all these things together for the good of those who love Him and are called according to His purpose for them. So, what does good mean, God? And one of the things that's come out of this is this idea that God really isn't good. Because people have defined good to mean, I get the life I want. Which, no problems, all blessings, everything's wonderful. That God is working to give me the problem-free life. And that's not in the Bible. In fact, Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have extra problems. James said, when you fall into diverse trials, what are you supposed to do? In James 1. Throw a party. Tell your friends, come on over, we're going to party tonight. Woo! Your friends say, what happened? Did you win the lottery? No. Did your rich aunt die and leave you a bunch of money? No. What happened? Man, the bottom's falling out and I got problems on every side. Come on over. Now we laugh at that because we know none of us would do that, including me. But James said, count it joy when these problems come into your life, because what they're doing is testing your faith. The word testing means to prove the genuineness of. These things are here to test your faith in order that your perseverance, or we might use the word resilience, will increase. And as it increases and becomes mature or complete, you become spiritually mature, lacking nothing. So what did Paul tell Timothy to do? He told him in 2 Timothy 4, verses 2 through 5, preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, They will gather around them a number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. Interesting thing about that phrase, itching ears. This is the only place in the New Testament it appears. And it's baffled theologians to try to figure out, what is Paul talking about here? Well, I came across one guy who was had already thrown his hands up. He said, I don't know, but I'll tell you what I read in a medical journal. And so in his medical journal, he read it's the cure for itching ears, which is a real problem. My ears itch a lot too. The cure for itching ears is get the wax out of them. They said that the wax build up in the ears causes itching ears. Now, can we make any kind of spiritual parallel there? When we let our spiritual ears get stopped up, and it gets stopped up when we have made the decision, I don't want to hear what the truth is anymore if it conflicts with what I want to be true. It's like putting wax in our ears. And before long, we want to find somebody who's going to come along and tell us what we've done is normal and is good. And so you search out somebody who's going to tell you what you've already decided that you want to be true is true. And that's what he's talking about in that passage there. So he goes on to say, they will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths, but you keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, and discharge all the duties of your ministry. So in this time where we're being pressured in many ways to compromise the truth, my encouragement to all of us this year is do not compromise the truth. Remember our good friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When put in that situation where the music played and everybody was bowing to Nebuchadnezzar's statue, including fellow Jews who were violating the law of God, but they did it anyway, under the promise that all will go well for them if they do. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said nothing, and they stood for the truth. Well, today is number 3. This is the third one I want to encourage us with, and we'll close with this one. And that is this: keep your focus and finish the race. Keep your focus and finish the race. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Now, does that mean God wants us to compete with each other? No. This race is not a competition. It's an endurance race. It's a marathon. The goal of this race is to finish it. And if you finish this race, you receive a reward. To finish the race means we cross the finish line. Everyone who competes in the games, that being the Olympic Games, goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified from the prize. Have you ever heard of Shizo Kanakuri? Nobody's heard of him? Shizo Kanakuri. You've heard of him? No? He's a runner. So here we go. When you're in the middle of a marathon, if you feel like getting to the finish line will take a lifetime, for most people, that's just hyperbole born out of exhaustion. For Kanakuri, Kanekuri, however, he finished the Olympic race for Japan 54 years, 8 months, 6 days, 5 hours, 32 minutes after he started. A lifetime actually did pass before his final steps. Kanekuri, known as the father of the Japanese marathon, represented the country in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics. It was an incredibly hot day, nearly 90 degrees, and of the 67 marathon runners that day, only half were able to finish the course, and one even died from the heat. Kanekuri survived, but he collapsed and lost consciousness. Locals who were watching the race saw him fall, and they helped him into their house to recover. Kanekuri was embarrassed to have not completed the run, and so he boarded a train and quietly went home without rejoining the festivities or notifying officials of his whereabouts. This was 1912. There were no helicopters following the runners. There was far less oversight on the long race that went through the countryside than there would be today. As far as Stockholm was concerned, Kanekuri had disappeared. He didn't just not finish the race, he was declared missing in the country and remained so for 50 years. Unbeknownst to Kanekuri, he became known as the missing marathoner, a famous and mysterious story for locals. In 1967, a journalist tracked Kanekuri down in Japan. He had continued to have a successful running career, but had long since retired. And the Swedish National Olympic Committee invited him back to Sweden to come finally finish his race. Kanekuri, now elderly, accepted the invitation and, according to reports, happily ran the remainder of his race. His time, more than 54 years later, being read out to the crowd with the announcement that the event now officially concluded the 1912 Olympics. Though obviously ceremonial, a sweet gesture made him the slowest marathon runner ever. It was a long trip, the then 75-year-old Kanekuri said to the Swedish press. Along the way, I got married, had 6 children, and 10 grandchildren. So you may feel this race that we're running is going to go forever. You may be like old Kanekuri. It may just take a while to wrap it up. But the Christian life is very much like a race in that there's occasional sprints, but for the most part, it's a marathon. God assigns the lane. Now, this is one that sometimes bothers people. God assigns the lane for us to run in. Now, we like to assign our own lane because when we're running and we're on the obstacle course portion of it, and we look over here and there's so-and-so and their life just seems to be so smooth and not a problem, we like to try to get over there into their lane. But God assigns the lane. If you get over in their lane, it won't work. You'll be like Lot. You see, God gave Abraham a lane, but he didn't give that same lane to Lot. But what did Lot want to do? He tried to crawl over in Abraham's lane. And Abraham was blessed for continuing his lane. Lot's life fell completely apart because he was in the wrong lane. So God assigns the lane for us. God provides the strategy for us to finish. And sometimes it does along the way as God reveals to us what he wants us to do and how we need to approach things. That's why it's so important that we are continually in prayer, that we're continually in tune and, again, intimately connected with Christ so he can tell us what to do. Because God may have something for you to do tomorrow that's totally different from the way you did it last week. You just don't know. So, God assigns a strategy. There's hurdles along the way. I wish it was a smooth track. It's not. And that's one of the problems today is people are told that it is. Your walk with God is not going to be on a smooth track that goes in circles. It's a cross-country run. And there's going to be times that the surface is flat and maybe there's water on every side and it's nice and cool because there's trees lining the trail and life just seems real good and easy. And that's wonderful. Enjoy it, because there's going to come another part of the race where there's nothing but sun on the trail. It's a dirt track and it's going uphill. Finishing the race will require discipline and endurance. And that's why James tells us that these trials come in our lives to strengthen our endurance so that we're able to finish the race. And a prize awaits those who do finish. Well, how do we finish? That's Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance or endurance the race marked out for us. I can't stand this race. I have to run the race that was marked out for me. You need to run the race that's marked out for you. And sometimes, like I said, we'll crawl out of our lane and try to get in someone else's lane, and it never works. And whenever you do that, I don't understand it all, but I've lived it. When there's been times I've crawled out of my lane into someone else's lane, my life just began to fall apart. But when I got back over in the lane where I belong, things began to come back together. So, he's marked out the race, marked it out for us. How do we proceed? Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God, right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So the first thing he tells us is look to those who've already finished. Let them be your inspiration. Since we're surrounded, and he's drawing the picture here of the Olympics, since we're surrounded by people who've already finished, take inspiration from that. Just as they have finished, so can you. And there's been a lot of debate about, well, who are these people? And all kinds of stories about, well, maybe it's the patriarchs, Christians that have gone before and all that. I don't know. It's going to come down to speculation. But I just like to think, and hopefully this is right, that family that walk with God and finish the race are in the grandstands now cheering us on. And if that's true, I have a mom and dad who's up there waiting and cheering me on. You've probably got family members up there waiting who are cheering you on. Finish the race, finish the race, finish the race. Because you can. But we won't if we compromise the truth. So it isn't just, I'm going to try really, really hard to be a good and religious person. It's keeping our eyes on Jesus, but it's also a commitment to the truth. We cannot compromise the truth. What's the next thing he said to do? Well, first, keep your eyes on those that have gone before. Second, get rid of unnecessary weight. And don't everybody look at me when I say that. But that means to throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. So what are some things? Worldly distractions. Habitual sin. That's the sin that so easily entangles. If I were going to run a race, which I would never do that, it would be stupid for me to go out there and throw a big pack on my back and say, like they did in the Army when Robbie was going through, he had to run how many pounds was that pack? 75 pounds pack on his back. And they would run 5-10 miles with that pack on their back. Well, see, if they were doing what they said here, there would be no pack. In fact, during this time, there was no clothes. There was nothing to slow them down. Get rid of the unnecessary weight, the things that we carry in life that only hinder us. Develop perseverance is the third thing he says. God sends trials our way to develop perseverance in us by requiring us to learn to practice the truth. So develop perseverance. Number 4, stay in your lane, which we've talked about. Number 5, keep your eyes on Jesus. Number 6, do not lose heart or grow weary. And number 7, encourage each other in finishing the race. And I came across another neat story about racing. It came from the Athletic Coast Conference Cross Country Championship in 2016. When Boston College student Madeline Adams began to fall towards the end of the race, Eve Tate from Clemson immediately stopped running to help. This isn't a case of anyone would have done that, because dozens of students ran past them as they struggled towards the finish line. It was a touching moment, but when that wouldn't have been possible if yet another student hadn't jumped in to aid them. Adams couldn't walk, and Tate, though trying, couldn't carry her alone. That's when Rachel Pease from Louisville decided to also forfeit her finish in order to join Tate in helping Adams. The 3 women from 3 different schools all finished together, and for just a moment, they were all victorious. See, that's the part of it we don't need to forget. This isn't just us and Jesus. In this race, we're running with other people. And there may be times that you see people stumble along the way. Don't just run past them. Go back and say, can I help? See, that's called the minister of reconciliation, or the minister of restoration, where you're trying to help people get back on track with where they were with God before. So, 3 things this year. Remain intimately connected with Christ. It's a choice. If you want to be fruitful, you have to do it. It's not an option. Do not compromise the truth. Number 3. What was number 3? I just told you. What was it?
Keep your focus.
Keep your focus and finish the race. And if we'll do that, when you run across that finish line, you're going to run into the arms of Jesus. And he's going to say those words everybody assumes they're going to hear. Well done, good and faithful servant. And I say assume they're going to hear because I have to remember the words of a preacher who said, if you have not done well, who are you that God should lie? I'll let that one sit. But if we'll do these things, we'll hear those words. Well done, good and faithful servant. So remain intimately connected with Christ. Make the decision every day. Do not compromise the truth. Even if all those around you are compromising, you stand on the truth. And number 3, keep your focus on Jesus and finish this race. And if we'll do that, we'll be the kind of people God wants us to be. Father, I thank you that you have given us all that's necessary to live life the way you designed it to be lived. And you've given us all that's necessary to be the kind of people that please you and that bring joy to your heart. So, Lord, I pray that today we will take these 3 things and that we will put them into practice in our lives. Lord, help us each day to make that decision to remain intimately connected with you. Help us, Lord, to dig our roots down into the fact that we're not going to compromise the truth. And then, Lord, give us that perspective into the future of looking to Jesus and finishing that race that you've called us to run. Lord, I know if we do all that, regardless of what else we may accomplish in life, you will be pleased. So, Father, I pray for everyone who's here today. I pray that you will bless them and that your peace will be upon them. And I pray, Father, they'll have a blessed week and that they'll have an opportunity this week to share your love and your message of reconciliation with someone else. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless you. Hope to see you Wednesday night. Covered dish. Just bring something under the covered dish.